it's always pretty shocking. I've spent a lot of time on it. What happens for me is that these entities want me to do what they're doing. And what they're doing is using sound to make objects appear out of the air. They can sing objects into existence. And this, I think that they're language elves. They're not made of matter. Well, then what are they made of? It seems as though the place you go on DMT is made purely of language. It's as though there is a syntax hard thing to picture, but they are more like sometimes they're like sentences rather than organisms. The essence of their presentation is like that of a pun. And so what they want you to do is they want you to learn to make a better kind of language. They want you not more articulate, not more clearly defined, but they actually believe or suggest that there can be a dimensional breakthrough into a language that is seen with the eyes. I think that the breakthrough that we're waiting for is not going to come out of a political movement or a redistribution of wealth or anything which could be called political. It's going to come out of a shift in the body. And these things happen. I mean, it's very mysterious how it happens. Like, think about language, ordinary language. Here you have two people. One is mute, and the other has the ordinary powers of speech. They look exactly alike. You can't tell a mute person from anybody else. And generally complex behavior. Language is a behavior of some sort. And it's very hard to imagine that it slowly insinuated itself into our being. It looks to me more like it was a kind of quantum leap of some sort, and probably appeared very suddenly. And there have been other, less dramatic, but more recent things like this going on. For example, you go to school and they teach you that in the 15th century, perspective was the thing for me to understand. I mean, perspective was discovered? How could it be discovered? I mean, you just walk, here it is, right? And say, no, before 1425, people didn't know that the part of the house farther from you was smaller than the part of the house. You can't understand. It doesn't make any kind of sense. Another example is St. Augustine, who was this great father of the church and who was, by the way, African. And he was known as the most brilliant theologian of his age. And the way he would prove to people that he was an exceptional and holy man was they would open a book of theology in front of him and let him look at it for a few minutes, and then they would close the book and he would be able to tell them what was written there. As far as we can tell, St. Augustine was the only man in Europe who could read silently. Can you imagine this? It was a miracle. Say, we don't know how the bugger does it. You just show him the book, and then he can tell you what's written there. Meanwhile, everybody else has to say, the buzz. And now we've completely assimilated this, although there are still a few among us who move their lips when they read. Vladimir Nabokov used to cruelly sneer at these people. He said once in an interview, he said, I didn't write books for people who move their lips when they read. And a final example, which will indicate that we've come to the end of the line in terms of sudden behaviors emerging, is according to my friend Bill Gibson in his book The Difference Engine. Oral sex was virtually unknown in England until the middle of the 19th century. And then it was brought in by French prostitutes, and it was just a mind-boggling concept to these Victorians. They could not wrap their mind around it. Well, from our vantage point, we probably assume people have been into this since the Stone Age. Maybe they have, but at least for several centuries in Victorian England, it absolutely died out as inconceivable. And, breakdancing is another one of these where a behavior suddenly emerges, completely coherent and formed, and then it recedes. So or if it has cultural utility, it's stabilized, such as my previous example. So what these tykes seem to be trying to say is there is a way for you to use your voice in order to activate a language which is not culturally taught. It isn't that you learn it from your parents, but that it's in the bone. A poetic language, a language scripted into your genes. And not only is it an Ursprach, an original speech, the vehicle of primal poetry, it can be seen. And, it's interesting how in our culture, when we talk about how somebody is really a gifted speaker, we always reach for visual metaphors. We say, I see what you mean, And in Spanish, they say, if they're talking to you and they want to know if you've followed, they say, is it clear? Claro? Claro, it means, is it clear? It's a visual metaphor. Say, she paints a picture, or his words have great clarity. What this means is that unconsciously, we trust the eyes, and we don't trust the ears. And telepathy, which most people, I think of as being able to hear somebody else think, is not that at all. What telepathy is when you see what other people mean. Because when you see what somebody means, it's like standing in their shoes. Point of view. That's a very visual oriented. If you can understand somebody else's point of view, you are that person in that moment for that purpose. And I think that it's amazing that the world has evolved as far and as fast as it has, the human world, glued together by nothing more than small mouth noises. I mean, that's what we're talking here, small mouth noises. As monkeys, we're set up for this. I mean, you can talk longer than just about any other activity that you can do without becoming exhausted. I mean, I'm the living proof of it. A very small amount of energy is required to keep the old tongue and lips going with the air moving out. I mean, imagine if we had to communicate as deaf people do with sign language all the time. This is exhausting. I mean, nobody communicates like that for 4 or 5 hours at a stretch. And yet Castro can give a 4-hour speech at the drop of a hat. So we're set up for this. The problem is, it requires a congruence of interior dictionaries. Because what happens is my words go across space as an acoustical signal. They enter your ear. You are very rapidly looking up each word as it comes in and comparing it to your definition. And as long as we don't look too closely at this, communication seems to be happening. the biggest showstopper there is in most situations is to say to somebody, now would you explain to me what I just said to you? Because then it turns out, the definitions are wildly variant. I mean, it's not so wild if you're saying, since you're up, would you get me a grant? Although even that's ambiguous. Maybe they say, why don't you just have one grant? But if you get into deep stuff, if you're saying, the ontological modalities of the post-Renaissance mind have issued into a situation of deconstructionist vitality such that all bets are off. Say, now would you explain to me what I just said? I can't even do it with myself. I mean, people say, would you repeat what you just said? No chance, And I've looked at this, and there are models for this kind of verbal communication. Did we talk yesterday about the octopi and all that? No, thank God. See, whenever you think you're about to take a step that nobody has taken and go a place nobody's ever been, if you'll look back at Mother Nature, you can usually find that you've been scooped. And a very interesting example of this vis-a-vis language is what's going on with octopi. Octopi and squids, as you may or may not know, but most people know it because they absorb all these TV shows about nature. Somebody once said to me, I know you don't like television, but it's a wonderful way for my children to learn about nature. Anyway, what we've all learned from watching these wonderful shows about nature is that octopi can change colors. And most people think it's because they're into camouflage. You move on to green seaweed, you turn green, brown rocks, you turn brown. It isn't that at all. It's something much more profound. It's that all over the surface of octopi are these specialized cells called chromatophores, and they can change into many colors. And not only can the octopus change colors, but the ordinary rubbery, smooth surface of the octopus can be made like goosebumps, but more dramatically wrinkled, very suddenly. The other thing about an octopus is, because they're soft-bodied, when they're in water, which is their natural element, they are very, very adept at folding and unfolding various parts of their body. So they can reveal a part of their body and then fold in and then show another part, and they're like a silk scarf in water. Well, what's going on here is that octopi communicate with each other by the way they look. And at first, this doesn't seem so profound. It just seems interesting. But when you analyze what's happening, you realize that this is a profound evolution in the project of communication, because there is no culturally sanctioned dictionary among octopi. And really what is happening is the octopus wears its mind on its surface. They have a vast repertoire of dots, blushes, traveling patterns that move across their surface. And these behavioral displays indicate the internal state of the organism. It is literally, it wears its language on the surface of its skin. It is a syntactical creature. Its behavior is its syntax. And, some of these the octopi as a whole, they're mollusks. They're not even vertebrates. I mean, these things split from the line of development that leads to us 700 million years ago. mean, you want to talk about an alien form of life. An octopus is about as far away from the human experience as you can possibly get. They evolved in shallow coastal waters, but then because so many things were evolving in those shallow waters, some of them evolved into the benthic depths. And in those depths, there is no light. So in order to preserve their ability to communicate over long periods of time, they evolved phosphorescent chromatophores all over their body. And some octopi even have eyelid-like membranes put on various places of their skin so that they can blink very rapidly and modulate the phosphorescent light. So you can imagine in the darkness of the benthic depths of the ocean, the communication between two octopi is just a dance of lights in utter darkness. I mean, it's naked mind in the water. And when they are in communication like that, they are, for all practical purposes, one organism. This is why octopi excrete ink into the water. It's so that they can have a private moment. You know, essentially the octopus ink is the equivalent of correction fluid. You know, you just have to erase. You say, I didn't mean that at all. And then, here's what I really meant. Well, this is why I'm interested in virtual reality, because it seems to me what we're trying to do is some kind of striptease of the mind. We want to get the mind naked, because if it can be made naked, then we will understand each other. We are clothed in flesh, and then clothing, and then class difference, race difference, age difference, income difference. But if you could see the mind naked, the commonality of human beings would be reinforced, and the presence of ego among us would be diminished. Also, there's no ambiguity in visible language. It's interesting that in the book of Revelations, there is this talk about how there is this sword which comes out of the mouth. It's describing a word which can be seen. And the whole history of the evolution of the Western mind is, in a sense, the birth of the Logos. The Logos is making its way towards self-expression. And it's doing this by claiming dimension after dimension of manifestation. And I think that electronic media and electronic culture and drugs and the mixing of all our world cultures together, what this is empowering is a visible logos, a logos that is beheld and therefore lacks ambiguity. Yeah.